History of the Industrial Revolution in the 1700s. Part 1. The Silent World. Painting a picture of the past. Close your eyes for a moment and transport yourself back to the year 1700. The world you see is vastly different from our own. It is a quiet world, a dark world. At night, the only light comes from the flickering of a candle or the glow of a hearth. The loudest sound you might hear is the ringing of a church bell or the thunder of a storm. For 10,000 years, since the dawn of agriculture, human life had remained largely unchanged. You lived where your parents lived. You did what your parents did. If you wanted to travel from London to Edinburgh, it would take you nearly 2 weeks of grueling travel by horse. Every shirt you wore, every nail in your house, every tool in your hand was crafted by human muscle and sweat. The limits of production were the limits of the human body. But then, in the mid-18th century, something shifted. A change began, not in the grand palaces of kings, but in the damp, coal-stained valleys of Britain. It was a transformation so profound that historians would later label it a revolution. But unlike the French or American revolutions, this one didn't just change governments. It changed the human condition itself. It turned night into day. It shrunk the globe. It created massive wealth and unimaginable misery. How did a small island nation on the edge of Europe manage to unlock the shackles of biology and launch humanity into the modern age? This is the story of the Industrial Revolution. Part 2. The Perfect Storm. Why Britain? Historians have argued for decades. Why Britain? Why not China? Why not France? The answer lies in a perfect storm of 5 unique factors that converged on this island at the exact same moment. First, the agricultural prelude. Before we could have factories, we needed food. In the early 1700s, British innovators like Jethro Tull began applying science to farming. They invented the seed drill. They introduced crop rotation with turnips and clover. This sounds simple to us, but it was revolutionary. Suddenly, fewer farmers could produce much more food. This created a surplus population. Thousands of farmhands, no longer needed in the fields, were left without work. They became a massive, mobile workforce, desperate for employment and ready to fuel the coming factories. Second and third, geography and governance. Britain sits on a massive fortune, not of gold, but of coal and iron, located near the surface and close to the sea. Furthermore, as an island, Britain had a powerful navy and merchant fleet ready to ship goods to every corner of the empire. Politically, after the chaos of the 17th century, Britain had settled into stability. Unlike the absolute monarchies of Europe, the British Parliament passed laws that protected private property and patents. This gave inventors the confidence that if they had a brilliant idea, they could actually get rich from it. Fourth, the Age of Reason. Britain was home to the scientific revolution. But unlike on the continent, where science was a hobby for the elite, in Britain, science was practical. It was a culture of tinkering. Men gathered in coffee houses to discuss mechanics, hydraulics, and engineering. The distance between the scientist and the businessman was very short. Fifth, and most importantly, the economic incentive. This is the key. In the 1700s, Britain had a unique economic structure. Wages were very high, but energy, in the form of coal, was incredibly cheap. In other countries, labor was cheap, so there was no need to build machines. But in Britain, factory owners were bleeding money on wages. They had a desperate financial need to invent machines that used cheap coal, to replace expensive workers. Greed, necessity, and geology sparked the explosion. Part 3. The fabric of change, textiles. The revolution began with something simple, something we touch every day, cloth, specifically cotton. In the early 18th century, the British loved comfortable cotton fabrics imported from India, but they couldn't produce it themselves at a competitive price. The traditional cottage industry, where families spun thread in their living rooms, was simply too slow. Then came the inventions. In 1733, John Kay invented the flying shuttle. With a flick of the wrist, a weaver could shoot thread across the loom at double speed. But this created a crisis. The weavers were now so fast, the spinners couldn't keep up. They needed a machine to spin thread faster. Enter James Hargreaves and the spinning jenny in 1764. Legend has it he saw a spinning wheel fall over and keep spinning, giving him the idea to stack multiple spindles. Suddenly, one person could do the work of 8. Then Richard Arkwright, the father of the factory system, created the water frame, powered by the strong currents of British rivers. Finally, Edmund Cartwright developed the power loom. Weaving was no longer a human art, it was a mechanical process. The result was staggering. The price of cotton plummeted. Manchester became known as Cottonopolis. For the first time in human history, the poor could afford undergarments and multiple changes of clothes. Hygiene improved, the economy soared. But these machines were hungry, and water power was limited by the seasons and geography. The revolution needed a new heart. Part 4. The Age of Steam and Iron. If textiles were the muscle of the revolution, steam was its blood. The problem was deep underground. As miners dug deeper for coal, their pits flooded with water. Early steam engines, like those by Thomas Newcomen, were inefficient beasts, used only to pump water out of mines. But in 1765, a Scottish instrument maker named James Watt was repairing a Newcomen engine. He realized he could make it far more efficient by adding a separate condenser. Watt's engine didn't just pump, it could create rotational motion. It could turn wheels. This was the turning point. Factories were liberated from the riverbanks. They could now move into the cities, powered by coal. And to build these high-pressure engines and the rails they would eventually run on, Britain needed stronger metal. The iron industry, previously dependent on burning wood, switched to coke, a purified form of coal. Iron became cheap. It became strong. In 1779, the world gasped as the first iron bridge was erected in Shropshire. It stands there to this day, a testament to the dawn of the modern world. With cheap iron and powerful steam came the locomotive. The world shrank. A journey that took days now took hours. Fresh food could be transported to cities. Ideas spread. The railways were the internet of the 19th century, connecting the nation in a web of steel, and the shadow of progress, society. But we must not romanticize this era. For the people living through it, the Industrial Revolution often felt less like a miracle and more like a nightmare. As factories multiplied, millions of people flooded into cities like London, Manchester, and Liverpool. The infrastructure simply collapsed. Imagine walking through a British industrial city in 1840. The sky is permanently black with soot, blocking out the sun. The air tastes of sulfur. There is no sanitation. Sewage runs openly in the streets. Diseases like cholera and typhus sweep through neighborhoods, killing thousands. And then, there was the work. The concept of the workday changed. On the farm, you worked with the sun. In the factory, you worked by the clock. And the clock was cruel. Men, women, and children, some as young as 5 or 6 years old, worked 14 to 16 hours a day. They were known as scavengers and piecers, small children crawling beneath the giant, heaving looms to pick up loose cotton, risking their limbs and lives for pennies. The divide between the rich, the new bourgeoisie, and the working poor, the proletariat, grew wider than ever before. Resentment boiled over. The Luddites, often misunderstood as people who hated technology, smashed machines not because they were backward, but because they were starving. They were fighting for their dignity and their livelihood. It took decades of suffering before labor unions and laws like the Factory Acts began to tame the beast, banning child labor and setting limits on working hours. Part 6. Conclusion. The Legacy. By 1851, when Britain hosted the Great Exhibition at the Crystal Palace, it was undisputed. Britain was the workshop of the world. But the genie was out of the bottle. The secrets of steam and industry spread to Belgium, to Germany, to America, and eventually to Japan. The Industrial Revolution was the great divide in human history. It gave us the ability to feed billions. It gave us modern medicine, transportation, and electricity. It lifted more people out of poverty than any other event in history, but it also left us with scars. The smokestacks of the 18th century began the cycle of carbon emissions that we are struggling with today. The social inequality it birthed still challenges our societies. From the first spinning jenny to the supercomputers of today, the story is continuous. We are still living in the world that the Industrial Revolution built. And as we stand on the brink of a new revolution, the revolution of artificial intelligence, we must ask ourselves the same questions they faced 300 years ago. Who will benefit from this power, and what will be the price? Thank you for watching.